$200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES.
Only on Super NES.
You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soulblazer.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Super NES Podcast, episode number 141. This is Greg, aka Soulblazer, one of your hosts, and we are back. I apologize for how long that the planned break turned out to be. I was only planning to take a couple months off to get settled into a new apartment, but real-life events, such as the current ongoing pandemic and other stuff going on, kept me from being able to turn to the podcast as soon as I wanted to. So I apologize for that. I hope everybody did enjoy the two-part interview that we did release a couple months ago of Dan Kitchen. In the meantime, and so we are back with some changes. One of the biggest changes being here that we have a new co-host to replace George. George is perfectly fine. As George said in the last episode we did together, he just had to step down from his co-hosting duties because of real life and other things like that. He is continuing to edit the podcast for us, so I'm very appreciative for that, and I want to thank George very much for the help and for the continuing support he gave the podcast, and for all the time that he spent co-hosting with me. He'll be missed. And so we actually have, ironically enough, more so George's friend than my friend, I think. But anyway, I am very pleased to welcome to the podcast our new co-host, Joe. So hello, Joe.
Hey, Greg, how you doing?
Doing all right. People who listen to the podcast may remember that Joe and I did do one of the podcasts in the past a couple years ago. He joined us along with my friend and fellow co-host Jawa on an episode of PlayStation Power that George and I did on the original Lunar game,
Yes.
Lunar Superstar Story. So I knew we had some podcast chemistry. So anyway, I asked Joe, he was interested. So anyway, Joe, since most people probably, I should assume it's like probably most of our audience will not know the previous podcasts that podcast that you did. So
Right.
If you don't mind introducing yourself a little bit, just talking about yourself, your background with the system, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, I'm Joe. I also do a podcast called The Radical Retro Roundup that is currently on hiatus, but we'll be coming back soon, I hope. Fingers crossed. As far as the Super Nintendo goes, I almost have no familiarity with the system. So growing up, we had a Nintendo, and that was a Christmas gift / Hanukkah gift. And then when it came to the next systems, we as in my sisters and I were trying very hard to get a Super Nintendo. And I want to say the reason was price was why we were always told no, but it ended up we got a Sega Genesis that year. So I was a Sega kid, and I didn't really discover the SNES until late 90s when emulation started to become a thing.
Right, yep.
And emulation wasn't great at that time, so
No.
I had a very limited library. Like, I could play Super Mario World, and that was more than enough for me. And then I didn't physically have a console until about 5 years ago when George, for my birthday, he sent me a Super Nintendo with F-Zero.
Okay.
And I love F-Zero. It's such a good game. So then I started kind of branching out and just kind of picking up like cheap cartridges and kind of exposing myself to the library that way. But for the most part, now that I have a Super Nintendo Classic and doing this podcast, I'm hoping to broaden that world, the Super Nintendo, because right now it's basically first-party games and some like some very few obscure titles that no one else really cares about.
Well, we all have those gems on the system that we all like for whatever reason or another.
Very
maybe,
true.
Like maybe nostalgia, maybe just it's kind of like a niche that's at for hobby or whatever that we're into.
Right.
So, but yeah, okay, So I mean, one of the reasons I picked Joe was because of the fact that. Was specifically because of the fact that he did not have a lot of familiarity with like the library. I mean, he knows the hardware and he knows enough stuff to be able to have a good conversation. But for many of these games we're going to be covering, it's going to be his first time or limited exposure to these games. So getting a fresh perspective on these things is always fun. Just for frame of reference, Joe, because to help put this in perspective, do you mind if I ask how old you are?
Yeah, I am 39 years old.
Okay, so I'm 44. So
I was gonna say I know you're a few years older than I am.
Right. So I was 15 when the system came out. So
yeah.
A little bit of an age difference, not as much of an age difference as George and I were.
Right.
But Joe's somebody who definitely was around and remembers those 8-bit and 16-bit days.
Oh, I remember sleeping at my friend's house just so that we could play Donkey Kong Country. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Oh, you have Super Nintendo? I'm gonna be friends with you, sort of thing.
Well, the main reason the main reason I gravitated toward a Super NES as opposed to Genesis was just because I was an NES kid.
Right.
So I was patient. I was patient to wait, and it's I had. The NES was still having great games come out on the system as late as 91, 92, 93, so it's there's still good games coming out for it. I had a Commodore 64 still at the time I was playing that had games coming out for it.
Nice.
I had a PC, a decent PC by that time period, so I wasn't hurting for games, so I was willing to wait until the system came out. But yeah, so I had a close friend who had a Genesis who was the same way. He had a Genesis. So often, we do weekend sleepovers. He'd be at my house, I'd be at his house. We'd also trade systems every now and then on weekends.
Nice.
I definitely, I don't have anything against the Genesis. I think the Super NES has a better library as far as the genres I most love are concerned. Being like RPGs and and adventure games.
Right.
But the Genesis is certainly better suited to certain kind of types of games, I think, and it's certainly a decent system. So, So and we're also. So beyond that, a couple of the small changes for the podcast. We're making a couple small changes to how it's structured. The Patreon's no longer a thing because the things they didn't want to charge people for during the time the show was on hiatus. I probably would not be bringing it back. In case something happens again in the future. But so the format's still roughly going to be up the same. Joe and I are going to continue to trade off on picking games, but for this, and we are working on some specials, as mentioned before, some guest hosts on the podcast, that kind of stuff as it comes up. So both of us are in new apartments. The echo effect would be interesting to see. I didn't notice anything earlier when I was recording, so I'll have to let George let us know exactly how bad of an echo effect, if there is any one in this room, as far as that goes. But anyway, so far, Joe, if you're limited exposure to the system, which games have been your favorites so far?
A lot of the games are really first-party Nintendo games. Donkey Kong Country, Super Mario World, obviously Super Mario All-Stars, F-Zero, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which you haven't covered, and I'm sure we will at some point.
I actually did cover that one as a solo episode way back when.
Oh, okay.
So, but yeah.
A lot of people give that game crap, but and you know what? And it is Final Fantasy for babies. I will, that's fine. But that was, outside of the first Final Fantasy on the NES,
right?
That was my exposure to Final Fantasy.
Yep.
And at that time, I had been grinding through Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation, and then and with emulation, I discovered Mystic Quest. I didn't know any better. You know what I mean? So. It was a fun little romp. Other than that, I'm trying to think of something that would really pop out, but it's just, the stuff that everybody else loves, Super Metroid, Castlevania 4, the Super Star Wars trilogy.
That's another series that we're working to do cover in the future as a guest host thing, because it's like
that's a love-hate right there.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned
the franchise, but
yeah, no, exactly. You mentioned you had a mini, and like really, I think for the most part, I think they did a great job selecting games on that mini, because those are all like classic games on the system. They're all, I might quibble a little bit over the fact that maybe this should have been included like over that game. But but for the most part, 90% of the games on there, I think, are like good choices, because it's like, I think they should have included Final Fantasy IV on there, like as well as Final Fantasy VI.
Mm-hmm.
They probably should have had Chrono Trigger on there instead of Secret of Mana. Not knocking Secret of Mana, because that's also like a very good game, but Chrono Trigger is the one that people have more affection for. It's debatable if the best Street Fighter game's on there. I mean, I know the one on there is very good, but people still kind of quibble like about that one.
So it should have been Super Street Fighter.
Yeah,
hands down. So, but, it is what it is.
The Kirby games are more hit or miss, only because of people's style. They may not like Kirby. If you are a Kirby fan, those Kirby games are very good. But
they should have put Dreamland 3 on there.
Yeah, like I said, small quibbles, but for the most part, the collection of the games on there is rock solid.
Oh yeah,
even better, I think, than the collection of games that's on the NES Mini, and NES Mini has a decent lineup of games on there too. So,
and I modded my SNES Classic the minute I got it, and it was hard for me because I was thinking, like, what am I going to play? What am I not going to play? You have very limited space on the system.
Right. Yeah.
I think there's like 320 megabytes that you have to work with, which unfortunately will not fit the entire Super Nintendo library. So it's like, I got the 20 core games. I'm not going to change any of those. It's like, what do I add from there? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Yeah.
And obviously, one of them had to be this game so that I could play it.
Right. I mean, like, if you take out, if you narrow the library down to like U.S. releases only for games that were unique to the system, i.e., games not available on both the Genesis and the Super NES, you're talking a much more reasonable 400 to 500 games. Mm-hmm. So, I mean that should be doable. I think on there, but. Not that I've modded the system myself. I might mod it eventually at some point. But
right,
I actually just got my hands on the Mini myself recently, because a coworker of mine was selling hers because she never used it. As I got it from her with a third party wireless controller thrown in for like $50.
Yeah,
so,
that's a steal.
I primarily show play through emulation, but it's but it's definitely good for what it has, and extra controllers on hand is never a bad thing. So,
right.
The game you mentioned that we're covering in this podcast. This is actually a game that somebody suggested to me way back when, months ago, before the podcast went on hiatus, as a recommended game for us to play, and I don't remember, unfortunately, who recommended it. I've lost some. I believe it was a Facebook communication. I could not find that. I could not find it, so I apologize in advance. I don't remember who recommended the game. I don't think they were recommending the game to mess with us. I think, there are some people who do have affection for this game, so he may have been one of them. No, we're looking at this episode for the return of the podcast. I was hoping to do a special. Well, that could not happen. The people who were trying to get on it could not be available for one reason or another. So I figured we kick out the podcast again with a a listener request. Mm-hmm. We're looking at the Super NES port. I'm using air quotes for that. Of Dragon's Lair, which. I feel stupid having to explain what Dragon's Lair is, but I think I better summarize it real quick for the two people out there who may not be familiar with it. Dragon's Lair is a very classic arcade game that was credited for being kicking off the short-lived Laserdisc craze. in the arcades in 1983. And I remember seeing this game in the arcades as a kid because I was 7 at the time. So, and this was huge when it came out because it's like everybody was blown away by it because the fact that it's live action animation. The person behind it, Don Bluth, was an animator who worked for Disney on several other movies before he left Disney and formed his own company. And as a result, you have some very gorgeous cartoon-looking animation style in this game being played through Laserdisc, which was the multimedia format of the time. In an arcade cab, and basically you're playing him through a live-action Dirk the Daring, the hero, who's a knight who's charged with rescuing Princess Daphne from a dragon, and you're playing him through a live-action cartoon. And every now and then you had to make choices that determined what kind of encounters that you had, and you had to decide about those encounters by doing the correct sequence of joystick and or button pushes at the right time before you got killed. And and it was also one of the very first games that cost 50 cents because of the high because of the high expense of the tech involved. And yeah, this was a really popular game when it came out. They were so popular that many arcades would install monitors above the arcade machine as well, so like people watching it could see what was going on. That's how popular it was. It was a short-lived fad, mostly because that the main knock against the game and of the Laserdisc games that came out is that they have very short playability. Because once you memorize the controls, once you know what to do, that's it. I mean, there's not really the fun is learning what to do and seeing the cartoon. If you know once you know what to do, it's like a 10-minute game. That's it. So plus also the fact the drives that the Laserdisc the Dragon's Lair used were an older model that had a habit of breaking down a lot. So it's like there's constant repairs. They weren't cheap machines either. So so the whole Laserdisc fad was relatively short-lived. There was a sequel the sequel was being worked on right after Dragon's Lair came out, but because the whole arcade industry imploded for a while, that sequel, Dragon's Lair 2 Times Warp, did not come out until did not actually finally get released until 1988. At which point the machines were better, but the game still didn't do very well. So
that fad had unfortunately passed for them. Right.
But at the time, Dragon's Lair, during its peak, Dragon's Lair was very popular. There was a short-lived cartoon based upon the game on Saturday mornings,
which was not very good.
No, I remember watching as a kid. It did have a neat, the main thing it had going for it, it did have that neat gimmick about how just before a commercial break, they'd have Dirk come to a puzzle and be like, okay, what would you do? And after the commercial break, it showed a sequence of him getting out of it, very close to arcade games. That was a cool touch. There was also board game. There was other merchandising available. You had bedroom stuff, shirts, that kind of stuff. There was also a computer game that was considered to be kind of a spiritual sequel to the original Dragon's Lair that came out a couple years afterwards. And Dragon's Lair was also followed up by a game very much like it as far as the animation style went, Space Ace, which tried to solve some of the issues that Dragon's Lair had, as far as because that game offered multiple paths to go through the game. So it wasn't quite as limited as Dragon's Lair was. You had the option of being able to get through puzzles by energizing to become a superhero, as opposed to going through as a regular guy. So still some of the same issues Dragon's Lair did, but the actual replayability of the game was a bit better because of it. And that game also came out in Super NES.
It did.
Which actually plays much better. Actually, I played that game before in the past too. That game actually plays more closer to its arcade parent than this one does, I think. But anyway, so Dragon's Lair was going through a little bit of how do I want to say this? Rebirth, rediscovery in the early '90s. Because you had the first CD-ROM systems coming out. Right. So Dragon's Lair was being ported to things like the PC and Sega CD.
3DO.
3DO also had a version too. So some companies thought it was companies wanted to cash in on that by making the game for other systems. Now, of course, obviously, the 8 and 16-bit systems could not handle a CD-based animation-style game. So, the rights to the NES and Game Boy got snapped up by Sony through their Sony ImageSoft division, and the Super NES rights got snapped up by Data East. So both companies released their own version of the game for those systems. Sony put out a Dragon's Lair game for the NES and Game Boy, and like the Data East published a game for the Super NES. The NES game is notorious for being a very bad game. It's bad. I would not say it's the worst game in the system by far.
Oh no, definitely
but
not.
It definitely has, but it's definitely lower rung. Have you ever played that version, Joe?
I have.
It's pretty bad.
It's very bad. I mean, it's not bottom of the barrel. I think that goes to LJN's X-Men game. That game
yes.
probably
definitely.
the worst game I've ever played. But it is pretty bad, and I give it credit because it does try to stick to the source material. It just doesn't do a very good job of it.
Right, and the Game Boy version was, from what I understand, I never played that version, but from looking at it online,
I have not either.
The Game Boy version was very similar to this. Was very similar to the NES version, so it's
Yeah, it
pretty
makes
much
sense.
like right. So, Data East was a very well-known publisher and developer of arcade games during this time period. During the 80s and 90s. I'd say the track record overall is pretty good. Sure they had some bad games, but overall Data East was a very respected publisher and developer of games.
Yeah, definitely.
Their pinball division was very good. They made some excellent pinball games. So, they also released a short-lived arcade machine in the '80s called the Deco, which is abbreviation like their name. The idea behind that was they're trying to real quick. The Deco machine. The idea behind that was that they're trying to save arcade owners the expense of having to get a new game every time a game lost popularity. It was a multi-load system where you could where all you do was just buy the cassette and the security dongle. You put the use the security dongle to unlock the tape, and then you put the tape in the machine, and the machine loads the tape in the morning, and in the morning you're good to go. So you just use the same cab over and over again.
Gotcha.
So the drawback to that, of course, was the fact that it was very slow loading.
Right.
The tapes broke occasionally, and if you misplaced the security dongle, you couldn't load the game.
Right.
Also, the games released for that system were not very good. Burger Time was the best game that came out with the Deco format. So yeah, Data East was around from 1976 to 2003. When they went bankrupt, most of their games were acquired the following year by a company called Gmode, which is a Japanese mobile game provider, and they since have licensed out Data East games to other companies for their inclusions in things like arcade machines and compilations and collections, that kind of stuff.
Infamously to At Games.
Yes. Yep. So, yeah. The actual developer of this game, the Super NES version Dragon's Lair, was a company called Mode of Time Limited, which, if you've not heard of them, don't feel bad. They did develop a lot of games. They were around from like 1990 to 2000. Just most of their games were either like ports or just simply original games that were very like forgettable. I don't think they were bad games. They just didn't get they just flew under the radar for one reason or another because they were very niche games. Just to give you an example, they did the Atari ST version of Gremlins 2, the new batch.
Okay.
They did the Genesis version of Paperboy, which is actually a very good port of the game.
Yeah, that actually is.
They did the NES version of Prince of Persia, which is not very good.
Right.
Most of their games are ports. They had a few original games, Virtuato for the PC, Dirt Racer for the Super NES. Strike Point, the Hex missions for PC. But yeah, just like most games most people didn't know about. We've already covered one game by them on this podcast, The Adventures of Dr. Franken, which was a loosely inspired upon the Frankenstein franchise. Wasn't a bad game. Like what it was actually a pretty decent. When I remember of it, it was a pretty decent, pretty decent flat platformer. So most of the stuff was competent. That they're competent. Their games just didn't get like a lot of attention. So, like the NES version of this game, this is the platformer where the developers tried to take the spirit of Dragon's Lair and try to distill it onto a 16-bit game. The overall mission of the game is still the same. You're still playing as Dirk the Daring, trying to rescue the princess. There are 20 stages in this game, 5 stages for each level, and so the end of each level has a boss fight. So there's like 4 levels total in the game, and then there's also a final boss fight against the final dragon of the game. So 21 stages in this game, like all together. And like I said before, this is a platformer. You basically just go around the screen trying to either kill or avoid obstacles. There are capsules the capsules that you can cut open with your main weapon, a sword, to find power-ups, which you can use the power-ups in a very Castlevania-like style to help you against enemies. Like the original game, one hit, you're dead. So you got to be careful to make sure that you're avoid the enemies. The stages are pretty short. We're going to talk about that here a little bit, I think. They're not very complicated to navigate. The main problem and the main obstacle of the stages is it's not always clear where you need to go to exit, because you have to. You're looking for an exit sign to be able to exit each stage. Right. And if you mess up and go the wrong way, you may run out of time before you realize what the exit actually is. So. The game does have some options at the beginning. You can set the number of players, 1 or 2 player, the players taking turns. So it has that going for it. You can set the number of lives you get. There's a password system. This password system that the game uses is very unique.
Agreed.
It works by giving you a screen of like 8. I think it's 8 digits, Joe. 8 numbers.
Yep, and 8 numbers.
And it slowly, and so what it does is it slowly brings onto the screen card balls with letters on them, A, B, C, and D, to match up with a number. So the password you have to look to see which number each letter is at in sequence. For example, the A may be over the 2, the B may end up over the 7, and so on and so on. So it takes a moment to figure out, like, okay, how the heck do I read this? But it's a very weird power system. I've never seen anything like that before. I don't know why they did it that way. I don't know what was wrong. Just giving you. I don't know why they felt they had to do that and not just give you a simple password system.
Yeah, I agree.
So, anyway, so this is our first time playing the game for both of us. So Joe, what were your overall impressions on the game, like both good and bad?
Oh man, I have 2 pages full of notes.
More than I have, actually. So,
first thing I noticed right off the bat was they tried very hard to emulate the music that was in the original Dragon's Lair arcade cab, but unfortunately did it very poorly.
Yeah, the music.
It's not so much that it's like horrible music. It's just that they almost use like the same tones, so it all just meshes together to be like one thing, and it's just very boring.
I'd go one step further and say they did mess up the music, because there's a lot of tones that are like off key. It's like they're trying to do things. They're trying to do things Super NES sound hardware that I love. Don't get me wrong, I love the Super NES sound hardware. It does some amazing music. But with certain instruments, the system does not do very well, and they're perfectly, and it almost seems like they're trying to choose the wrong notes the wrong notes and tones on purpose.
Right.
They're definitely the music definitely is I agree with you. The music's definitely a huge miss. So,
on the other side of the coin, though, Dirk looks great. The animated enemies look fantastic. Like, the way they look is amazing.
Yeah.
They animate well. Unfortunately, combat is horrible, in my opinion. I did not enjoy combat. Actually, I used a password to be able to get to the fight with the dragon at the end. And the only way I could figure out how to get through that area was basically just keep throwing the axe. Because when you start with the password, you have your basic sword and your axe. You don't get any power-ups. So you just have to keep spamming the axe as you walk forward to be able to kill everything, because the little black bats just fly out of everywhere, and they'll get you and extinguish your 3 hit points before you even get to the dragon.
Right. Let me take back something I said earlier. I was thinking about different games. I apologize. This is not a one-hit kill game. So it does have that going for it.
It feels like it, though, because you will go through those 3 hit points so quickly.
Yes. So yeah, just to follow up what you're saying, yeah, the graphics are this game's like best thing going for it. They're very. They really try to capture the feel of the original animation used like arcade game, and they did a pretty good job at it. I mean, the Super NES could use some. I mean, Disney also did some very excellent storyboard animation style with their games. I'm not sure if you ever played like Lions, the Lion King or Aladdin or whatever, but or Toy Story looks great on the system. Dragon's Lair for the system definitely looks like the arcade game in many ways. It's not quite as sharp animation, but it's very good animation.
That was one of the other notes I had, was that the opening cinematic and Dirk's death animations were really good at capturing what the original arcade game was. Yeah. Dirk moves very well too. Like like you said, his animation's smooth. The enemy's animations are smooth. I would argue what you just said, though.
Okay.
I felt Dirk was very slippery.
That gets out to more of the controls / collision detection I was going to talk about here next.
Okay.
You and it seems like you and I may disagree a little bit on this, but we'll see exactly how much we do.
Okay.
I agree with you. Combat in this game is not really fun. I mean, it's not horrible, but it's not fun either, because it's like your sword has a good range, but the problem is that enemies come at you at odd angles, making it very hard for you to be able to defend yourself. And maybe that's on purpose. We're talking about the difficulty of this game a little bit, but it's very difficult sometimes to get the right angle to attack an enemy with either your sword or your optional weapon at that point.
Well, I feel like the optional weapon was added because the initial combat was so bad. Like, they figured out, like, okay, well, you can't jump and swipe with your sword, which you should be able to. And instead of programming that, they were just like, oh, we'll give him an axe or a dagger. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So, I'm not sure about that. Collision detection I thought was hit or miss, because it's like, the collision detection was not very good.
Right.
Which I appreciated when I was playing, because other times I'd be like, man, that enemy should have killed me. But then I did not appreciate when I thought the enemy should have been dead because of a sword stroke and was not.
Right.
So it definitely was hit or miss depending upon what you're trying to get. What you're trying to use it for.
Yeah, and enemies will even spawn on top of you sometimes, which oh my god.
Oh yeah. So
that got me, especially the aerial ones.
Right. So. So we mentioned that this game, like many other arcade games, has a time limit. In some of the stages, the time limit's very short. This is because, like I said before, the stages themselves are not that big. The problem is that it's not always clear how to navigate them. So you may lose some lives to figure out some time to trying to figure out where you need to go to finish the stage.
Right.
Because it's like that goes hand in hand with what we were talking about before with the enemies, about making the game more difficult than it probably had to be. I think maybe if they'd either turn down the difficulty level or given you difficulty options, I think it would have been like a lot better. But as it was, you're trying to emulate. I appreciate the fact that developers were trying to probably trying to emulate the difficulty of the original arcade game, and oftentimes home games are more difficult than their arcade counterparts, because you have like things like continues, multiple lives, that kind of stuff. But still, the difficulty of this game is like the difficulty should not have been as high as it was, and the difficulty of this game was more because of things. How can I say this? I felt like the difficulty in this game was more because of things outside like my control, as opposed to anything I was doing as a player.
Right. Yeah, this is definitely one of those where, like, sometimes when I died, I knew it wasn't my fault, it was definitely something with the game.
Right. So, so we mentioned, so one of the things the game does have going forward, which I do like there are items that you can pick up. You can get gold coins. If you get 25 coins, you get to unlock a bonus stage next time you exit a level. So you can get like things like lives, points, that kind of stuff.
I never got that lucky.
Hearts will give you extra. So hearts will give you like an extra life. The clock will increase the time limit, which is a godsend for some ages.
Yep.
You can always find a shield, which gives you like a shield, which gives you like a health point back. And then, for the 3 ranged weapons you can have, you can get the axe, which is like, these are all very Castlevania like weapons. The axe, the axe works, and the axe works like an arc. The knife, the knife is a quick firing, quick firing knife, and the shuriken is a shuriken operates like the shuriken like in the old school Ninja Gaiden games, which you can throw it out, it comes back at you.
And it's also a heat seeking. It'll go straight for the enemy.
Yep, shuriken definitely the best weapon. If you hold on to the shuriken, by all means, hold on to it.
Absolutely.
So that said, there are some boss fights in which the axe is better as opposed to the knife. Depends upon the enemy that you're fighting. I think you may be right, Joe, like in saying that the developers gave you these weapons to compensate for some of the weaknesses with the combat in the game.
Yeah.
Since the game was not originally a platform game and they're trying to make it into a platform game. So, it's interesting. The sound effects I hated. The sound effects in this game I did not think were very good.
I could have done without the sound effects, but at the same time, I wouldn't have liked this game if it was just the music. You know what I mean?
True. Yes. Yeah. So there is a good variety. There's a good variety of obstacles and enemies in this game. I will give it that much.
Absolutely.
You have obstacles like anvils, balls, flame.
You got the snakes.
Yep.
You get the Lizard King at some point. I think the Lizard King shows up in the 2nd level.
Right, yep.
And then you see the little mud goblins. They show up. Pretty much any of the enemies that you would come across in the actual Dragon's Lair game, they were able to stick it into this game, which was actually really nice.
Right, yep, yeah. So,
yeah, I definitely can't say this game did not, stray away from the original source material. They used it very well. Right,
yeah. I mean, this game feels like what would happen. Dragon's Lair had come out in the arcade games, the platformer, as opposed to being a playable cartoon, basically. So, it's still curious that they felt the franchise was good enough at this point to make a game on in the first place. From what I can tell, this game did not sell very well. It's somewhat uncommon to find, which is not reflected by its price on eBay. We'll get to that later on. But I could not find any contemporaneous reviews of the game when it came out, which shows just how under the radar that this game flew.
It comes down to, like you were saying, Dragon's Lair was kind of seeing a bit of a resurgence, but the thing is it was the Sega CD, the 3DO, where they were actually getting the ports of the arcade game.
Right.
And I think the NES version might have left a bad taste in some people's mouths when it came to because the SNES version came out after. So there was some time there, you know what I mean?
Right, yeah. Yep. The Super NES version of the game, the Super NES version of the game came out in February of '93, and something else I also found was curious. Depending upon where you were in the world, this game had different names. It was known in Europe as Sullivan Bluth Presents Dragon's Lair.
Oh, okay.
For copyright reasons, because I guess that Don Bluth's company had more had more rights over there in Europe as opposed to here in the States. In Japan, Dragon's Lair was always known as Dragon's Magic. So this game got released in Japan under that name. So it did get a worldwide release. So DVDs did help Deities being a big publisher at that time, publishing all 3 regions, they were able to ensure the game got a like a wide scale release. It just didn't, it just didn't sell very well, like from what I can tell. So and as we kind of allude to, most reviews of this game, modern day reviews, are not very favorable of it, for the reasons we already talked about. That said, however, there are some people who do enjoy this game because they think, because they think it's a decent platformer. And if you like platformers, especially if you have like an affection for the Dragon's Lair series as a whole, it's not the worst platformer on the system. I mean, like, it does have some charm to it. So, I will give it that much.
Yeah, I definitely think this is a game that nostalgia has to pull on the heartstrings to really appreciate today, though.
Right. Yeah, and if you know what you're doing, this game's, and if you know how to navigate, how to navigate the stages,
right.
The game's pretty short. I mean, like, the Let's Plays of this game on YouTube are only about half an hour long. It's like...
I couldn't get because, like, within a half hour, I was, like, running around only the first 3 levels. Like, I took the wrong exit and made a big giant circle. At that point, I was like, okay, I'm putting my controller down. I'm not coming back to this for right now.
Right. And the last major thing that caught my attention in this game was swimming in this game is very weird, because it's like, Dirk apparently has some magic that allows him to be able to put a balloon around him when he goes in the water.
Yeah, I saw that in the Let's Play. I personally did not get a chance to play any of the water levels.
But rather than swimming in the water, as most heroes would do, he's just kind of like curled up in a ball, like in the fetal position, just like going, and I'm going like, okay, what the heck's going on here? But it's very weird looking. There's definitely some weird design choices of this game for sure.
I mean, you want to talk about weird, that little icon that you use on the main menu where it's just Dirk's head with 2 tiny little feet walking.
I think it's an Easter egg to one of the death scenes. Speaking about Easter egg though, there are 2 Easter eggs toward the ending of this game. So you get a message when you finish the game that says like Dragon's Lair is the modern, and it's like, what does that mean? Because it's like the Dragon's Lair is not a modern game,
right?
Maybe they're making a reference to the fact that there's a modern version of Dragon's Lair.
Mm-hmm.
It's very weird. It's a weird cryptic message. The other cool thing, I do like the credits. Did you watch the credits on YouTube, like how they're handled?
As soon as I saw Dirk and Daphne in that little heart animation, I shut it off.
Oh yeah, the ending sucks, but but if you go through that,
I was like, thank God I didn't beat this game myself.
Yeah, but if you go through that, if you sit through that, you're treated to a very cute credit scene where it's like Dirk's going through a stage and he's attacking, and as the sword defeats enemies and cuts over obstacles, it reveals like programmer's names.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, it's a nice touch. That's a cool thing. So, and so apparently you can replay the game again at a higher a higher difficulty level after you finish the game the first time.
Oh, because that'd be so much fun.
Yeah, well, so I mean, you're going for, you're going for high score at that point, basically.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
So yeah, I mean, like overall, I can definitely see somebody having nostalgia for this game. If you were, if you were the right age when this came out, especially if you were a fan of Dragon's Lair to begin with. I mean, the graphics of this game are very, very good. And the controls themselves are fine. They handled well enough. The main problem with the controls was just how we mentioned the collision detection, the very limited weapon ability and arcs that you had over weapons in this game. So,
like I said, like for me, it just felt like Dirk was slipping and sliding everywhere, especially on the second level when you have to go traversing stairs and whatnot. It just, I don't know. To me, it felt slippery. But this is my first time playing this game, and like I said, very limited exposure to the Super Nintendo library. So I don't know if there's other games that control like this.
No, no, definitely there are the games. There are the games that control them much better. I thought it was a bit slippery, but it wasn't. But I didn't have as much problem with it as you did.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, so not the worst game we've covered before on the podcast. Not the worst platformer I played in the system. Definitely,
Right.
Definitely better than the NES version of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So, so if you're a Dragon's Lair fan, I think this is worth checking out. At least for a little bit. If you're looking for a decent platformer game, it's short, but this game does have some difficulty going for it. So, it's hard to recommend this game. I think I can really recommend it if you're like a fan of Dragon's Lair and or have some nostalgia for this game. But it is what it is. It's not. Nobody talks about this game for good reason. I think because just like there's better platformers available in the system.
So, what did you find for value of this game?
Well, the game sells for a decent price on eBay. Basically meaning that these prices are about typical for Super NES games, I think. So even though it is somewhat uncommon, I don't think because it's not very popular, people that hurt the price a little bit. So okay. There were no cheat codes or anything available for this game online. There's just the
passcodes.
Just the password system. So nothing really hidden in this game as far as that goes. So these prices always include shipping. There are 24 copies of this game currently being listed on eBay. The time I looked it up, 30 copies of the game has sold recently. Card only prices sold anywhere from $9 to $29.
Wow.
And CIB copies ranging from $35 to $40. So that's why I said
that's actually cheap for a CIB.
Yeah, typical mid-range Super NES prices.
Yeah.
So not that bad to add to your collection. Like you're a collector. So the artwork for this game is very good, though. I'll give it that much.
Yeah.
So I think it actually is the same. It is the same like as the arcade machine. So
it's definitely the same box art that they used for the Sega CD and the 3DO.
Okay.
cover.
Yeah.
So
nowadays you want to play Dragon's Lair. There's several very good collections out there. Collections out there that have the game. They also have some very nice modern features to add onto them. For example, we have the load time is almost nothing, which helps with which helps with the controls. You also have the ability to be able to change the controls like some of the versions of the versions of the game. So there's a Blu-ray version of the game that came out recently. It's pretty good, I hear. Which is also playable.
I was gonna say I have the Switch port.
Yeah,
and it's very good.
There's also Dragon's Lair collection available for the PS4, like Xbox One. That includes Dragon's Lair 1, Dragon's Lair 2, and Space Age.
Space Age. Yeah.
So, so if you want to play this game, it's very easy to play nowadays, and has some very good features. The replay value of the game is still very limited because, like I said, it still is a live action cartoon, so they can't really do anything. So they can't do anything about that. But there were plans for a movie based upon this several years ago. Money was raised, but as far as I can tell, that project's currently in hiatus. So,
yeah, I don't know what happened. I don't want to believe that Don Bluth just took everybody's money and ran off. But
yeah,
at the same
I don't want
time,
to. Yeah.
At the same time, it's like I've seen some concept art, and that's about it. Like no trailer, no nothing. No, we're working with this, studio. Last I heard, they were trying to strike something up with Netflix, which I thought was going to get it off the ground, and nothing, ended up coming out of that. So I don't know.
Well, Don Bluth has wanted to do something with Dragon's Lair for a long time now. He's facing the same issues now he's facing back then. He's just trying to get, trying to get interest because, Dragon's Lair was a very influential game for many reasons. So it's it's like it's very interesting. It's very interesting this game even exists because it's like this and Space Ace, which I think are
Right.
which I actually think Space Ace is like a bit better on the Super NES. They're very admirable. They're a very admirable attempt to try to get a game the system never could have handled natively to get a version of the game on the system.
Right.
Whether or not they should have tried is debatable, but I do admire the programmers like the effort.
Right.
So, yeah, like I mentioned, this company, who did the port, Mode of Time, they weren't fly-by-night developers. They had some
Right.
other games under their belt at this point, so they knew what they
Right.
were doing. Just that I think they made some. They probably had the same issues that most developers had back then, still have these days when doing licensed properties.
Yeah.
They were under a gun time wise.
Yep.
Didn't have a lot of money. Probably didn't have a lot of interest.
Right.
And they simply just like cobbled it together best they could and got out the door.
Nope.
So,
I agree.
but which is unfortunate. But that's often. Yeah, but then, as is the case now, that's often what happens.
Right.
Developers 99% of the time will simply take projects like this just to pay the bills and get food on the table.
Yep.
They'll work on it to get paid, and then they'll try to save. While they're also trying to save money and also trying to work on their own game project that they want to work on in the first place.
Yep.
Which this company did, as many of the companies back then did, and still do nowadays. So, I can't fault them entirely for some of the for this game existing.
Right.
I can fault them. I can fault them for some of the choices that was made in this game.
Right.
But it's like Dades was just trying to capitalize upon a property that was having a resurgence at the time, and just like this is what came out. So, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say about this game, Joe. Overall, I summarized what I thought about the game, and you.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything to add on to that?
I have nothing to add on to that. I think we've talked as much as we can about this.
Right. So, but okay. So, yeah. So, interesting game to look at. Like I said before, I wasn't sure what to cover the first episode back. So I thought, so I thought I'd look at the mailbag, and this was suggested. So we're covering it. So I definitely want to please the fans out there. Like I said before, I apologize. I cannot find who recommended this game, but yeah. So hopefully, if you love this game, you were not too disappointed by the fact that we were kind of hard on it. But you probably expected that. So
Exactly.
sometimes it's fun to rag on a bad game. But,
Yeah, absolutely.
And like I said before, this game is not the worst game I played. Not the worst game we covered at the podcast. So. Anyway, so next episode is going to be Joe's pick. I asked Joe to look at the. I asked Joe with his limited experience of the library to pick a game. They thought looked interesting. What did you find that's struck your interest, Joe?
Super Chase HQ.
Yes, which I have a little bit of experience with. I played this game way back when it first came out. This is another inspired by game. Because it's kind of a reimagining of the original arcade game, Chase HQ. So it definitely has some gameplay differences, which we'll talk about when we cover the game next time.
Yeah,
so,
it's gonna be a fun one.
Yes. So yeah, you've never played the game before, Joe. You just picked it because you thought it looked interesting.
I've played the arcade game. I love the arcade game.
Yes, the arcade game is very good.
I didn't even know a Super NES port was made until you and George had mentioned it on a previous episode, and I thought, well, you know what? That's where we're going.
I wonder which episode that was. It must have been an episode talking about like other like racing games.
I want to say it was like 140 because you guys were talking Super Off-Road was the game you guys were covering.
Oh, okay, you
went on a wild tangent about racing games.
That must have been okay.
The Super Nintendo. So I'm a racing guy. You were talking Top Gear and all that, so those will be in the future as well. So
yeah, Top Gear is a good game.
Yeah,
it's a good game. That'd be fun to cover. But anyway, okay then. Well, if you want to send me email about this podcast, if any suggestions, games to cover, feedback, whatever, feel free to email me. The email is the SNESpodcast@yahoo.com. We also have a Facebook group that you're welcome to post to. Your comments, suggestions, whatever. We have a streamer on Twitch who every now and then will post post their Twitch feed when they're covering Super NES games. So you can check the Facebook page if you're interested in checking out that. A lot more folks starting to stream Super NES games. Joe, I'm not sure if you noticed that, but
No, I haven't.
She has more of an upward tick for that these days.
Good.
I mean, more people are streaming in general right now anyway because of what's going on. So I think maybe that's part of the reason. But yeah, it's nice to see in any event.
Yeah, absolutely.
Joe, you mentioned you have one podcast currently on hiatus. Do you work on anything else currently?
No, that is it.
If somebody wants to contact you directly, how can they do so?
The best way to contact me directly would be at JOESUX30 on Twitter. There we go. Almost said Twitch. On Twitter. Twitter's probably the best way to hit me up, or just find me on Facebook, Joseph Copel. I'm open and public, so it can be easily searched. Same with the Radical Retro Roundup if you're interested in that. So.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Let us know. Yeah, for sure. Let us know when that podcast returns, because I remember that being we're keeping the same release schedule that we had previously. So, we're going to be recording episode once every 2 weeks. So, episodes will still be dropped on Fridays, if everything goes well. So, you can look forward to that. And like I said, we are working upon some specials, some guest hosts, some interviews. Things have been very difficult to plan right now because everybody, the pandemic's obviously has messed everybody up as far as our schedules and whatnot. So we're working on that. Still have patience. That stuff's still coming down the road later on. So, but anyway, yeah, it's great. It's great to be back. Yeah. Hopefully there will not be any more planned hiatuses, at least until December. So hopefully everything will go smoothly because of that. And I think that's about it. Joe, thank you again for agreeing to coach with me on this podcast. Yeah, should be a lot of fun. So
I'm excited for the beginning of this journey.
Yes. Yep. Educate you on some of the better games in the system. So
absolutely.
So it's a very it's a very rich library. It's like I'm still finding. One of the reasons I wanted to cover this podcast is because that the library is so huge. There's a lot of good games that simply simply fell through the cracks. That for one reason or another people just didn't notice. Yeah. So compared to podcasts on the opposite end of the spectrum, small console libraries. Right. Like the Atari 5200 podcast is already come and gone. Right. The 7800 podcast is already come and gone. The Jaguar podcast will be coming on in a couple of years. Right. Those libraries, those libraries are much smaller. So we're not going to be covering every game on the system because otherwise we'd be here we'd be here for the next 80 years. Well, but
I got time.
But we are trying to cover some of the more interesting games in the system, and for good or bad, this game disqualifies interesting.
Yes, absolutely.
But okay, so thank you again, everybody, for your time as always. Great to have you back, and we will talk to you again soon, hopefully. And Joe, take care of yourself.
You as well, Dre.
Yep,
and thanks everybody for coming on and signing in and listening to us. And
Agreed.
Bear with
me. No, you're fine. But. Okay, folks. Talk to you again next time. Take care, everybody.
Goodbye.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man. Now you're playing with power. Super power.